On today's Locked On Texans podcast, Cody and I dive into the versatility of Denico Autry. How impactful will he be for this front four, and who's been the best undrafted rookie free agent to this point in camp?
You are Locked On Texans, your daily podcast on the Houston Texans. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in, everybody, to this Tuesday episode of the Locked On Texans podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you to all of our first-time guests. Come on in, sit down. We're going to talk some Texans today. But the price of admission, subscribing, liking, and commenting to the Locked On Texan podcast on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, thank you to all of our returning listeners coming back and listening to Cody and I continue to talk Texans here on this Tuesday. On the other side of the screen, Texans Credential Media member, Sports Illustrated's own Cody Davis. I'm your Texans football analyst, John Some Sports Guy Hickman. We got to talk about Steven Nelson today. All right, we're going to dive into who has been the best undrafted rookie free agent to this point. And then we'll open up with the versatility of Denico Autry. I do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 in your pocket with any winning $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. I think it's important for us to open up today's show with Denico Autry simply because we've talked about Danielle Hunter and how impactful he'll be replacing John Grenard from last year. We talked about Will Anderson, and I do think we need to talk a little bit more about Danielle Anderson because as we talk about Denico, I wonder if this defensive line could look similar to the 2005 Indianapolis Colts defensive line. Robert Mathis, Dwight Freeney, I forgot what's the guy in the middle. He also had about 6 sacks, but that was a tough defensive line. 2 great bookends. But again, it's important to look at the impact of Denico Autry. We have not had an opportunity to really dive into him, Cody. And what I really wanted to talk about before I pass it over to you, he was asked last week about does it matter where he lines up, right? Inside, outside, B, C, over the tackle, whatever, A. And he said it don't matter, just put the ball down. Let's play football, right? A dog mentality. But the versatility of Denico Autry, if I could wrap it up into one word on how I believe it will impact Houston's defensive line this year, I think that word would be preservation, simply because now you have a guy that can allow you to go deeper a little bit, especially in the early parts of the NFL season, into your depth chart, and it will allow this defensive front to kind of have an opportunity to get those young guys out there, Dylan Horton, Khalil Davis, Fatu Kauzi out there, but it'll allow them to kind of stay a little bit healthier, I believe. So by not having to play a lot of those guys over 80% of the defensive snaps, because I think you have the depth behind it, but you got a player like Autry who can kind of sub in for Hunter on certain plays, sub in for Will Anderson on certain plays. And I think that's what's his maybe greatest attribute for this team, because once you get into those deep playoff runs, you're going to go up against the best of the best, crunch time of the season, anything can happen. And you want your best guys healthy out on that field.
Well, here's the thing. I don't think he's going to be subbing in for anybody. I truly believe that he's going to be starting right in the middle. And the reason why I say that is because, look, John, as you just alluded to, the fact that, he doesn't care where he plays. First and foremost, this is a man who has put together a very solid, a very good, and a very impressive career, knowing that he was an undrafted rookie free agent in 2014 when he started his career with the Raiders. And his productivity, whether it was with the Raiders, whether it was with the Titans last year, whether it was with the Colts, and now hopefully with the Houston Texans, he has been consistent. And when I take a look at Autry, the one thing I love about him, of course, like you and everybody else, is his versatility. And look, John, we have spent, let's say, the past month talking about who is going to take the helm as this team starting defensive tackle. A lot of us, including myself, is rooting for Khalil Davis. However, I do believe the injury that Khalil Davis was going through during mandatory minicamp that had him on the sidelines probably is going to hinder him. Now, look, once again, quoting Denico Autry, OTAs minicamp is not a time where he's going to say, hey, you won this starting job and you didn't win it. However, John, I believe that this team, this coaching staff, and of course the general manager in Nick Caserio is definitely going to put a lot of stock in what they have been seeing over these last couple of weeks at OTAs and minicamp. Autry is definitely one of those guys that consistently went out there and made plays. So, of course, you look at him from a standpoint, if you go back and you take a look at what he did last year for the Tennessee Titans, he was by far arguably their best defensive end. However, he's coming to a team where you're going to have Will Anderson Jr. and Danielle Hunter lining up on the end. So he's definitely going to have an opportunity to play on the inside. Here's the thing. Some of his best seasons in his first 2 years with the Indianapolis Colts in 2018 and 2019, this is what this young man did. A combined 48 tackles, 22 quarterback hits, and 12 and a half sacks. And he ended up posting a run defensive grade of 70.9. Once again, repeating one of my favorite statements from Coach Denico Autry. The reason why they put so much stock into that defensive front is because, look, he believes that everything starts up front on both sides of the ball. But most importantly, you want to make sure that you can get after the quarterback and disrupt their offense, especially considering that this is a team that we hope and expect to be competing in the AFC, where you got to take on the likes of Patrick Mahomes, a Lamar Jackson. And look, for the sake of this argument, until we see something different, I don't think they're going to be as good as they've been over the last couple of years, because we now have his biggest secret weapon. But you definitely still do not want to sleep on Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills. And even you got to take a look at the guys going down I-10 East all the way down to Florida in terms of the Miami Dolphins and Tua. So when you take all of that into consideration, man, the Houston Texans definitely have an opportunity to have one of the best defensive lines, and it goes beyond Anderson and Hunter. Autry is part of the main reason why, and this is what Coach Denico Autry had to say.
He's one of the toughest players, I think, and one of the toughest and most respected players across the league. Like, you talk to any offensive lineman that's went against him, he has their utmost respect. So, and you see the way he plays the game the right way. He plays hard. He plays with the intensity that's unmatched, and he still finds a way to get in the backfield, moving around, playing multiple spots, whether it's at the interior or on the edge. He's just a tough, hard-nosed football player that's unbreakable.
That was Denico Autry talking about newly acquired this offseason, Denico Autry. Let me clarify something. I don't think he's not going to start. I think he is a starter. Mm-hmm. No doubt about it. And if you look at the talent and what each player brings on that defensive line, he is clearly the third best D lineman, right? Hunter, Anderson, and Autry. And by the way, I think those top two at the end of the season, we'll be looking at both of those guys, and Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter, and kind of like, okay, who is the better version of each other? Simply because I think Will Anderson is going to be in for a huge year. John Crumpler of the Texan Wire just had an interview with him, and that was phenomenal. We talked about, just getting better and better study habits in terms of just how to win on the field. But Autry, I think, like, he's a Denico guy, right? He's just heard Denico talk about him. You got Barnett, you got Mario Edwards, you got Dylan Horton, and Horton is a guy that I think, like Cody mentioned a lot about, John mentioned last year, we got to just slow down a little bit with our expectations, but he'll be ready for training camp according to the coaching staff. We got Khalil Davis. Those four names. Now, is everybody going to make this roster? No. Somebody ain't going to make the roster. But right now, this D-line, I think D-line group is very deep. But with Autry, again, I think he just allows this team to have a mixture of defensive fronts. And I also like him because with him being able to play outside and inside, you're going to look at this team be able to kind of get very creative with their defensive front stunts, right? He can line up outside and end up inside. He can line up inside and end up outside. They're going to find ways to create pressure on offensive linemen, whether that be against the run or against the pass. And again, between Will Anderson, Daniil Hunter, and Denico Autry, you got 3 guys that can get after the quarterback. You got 3 guys that can cause chaos in the run game, especially Will Anderson. But I don't want to knock the other guys that are on this roster. I don't believe Houston will. And I think what Houston will really attempt to do is get creative with how they are able to preserve their guys' health for 17 games in preparation for a deep playoff run. And again, with Denico Autry, that's where I think he's special, because I may be able to pull out Hunter for a couple of plays. I may be able to pull out Anderson for a couple of plays. And depending on the team, depending on, what they're attempting to do defensively, I may want to have Autry, Barnett, Anderson, and Khalil Davis. I may want to have Autry, Hunter, Barnett, Mario Edwards. I may want to mix it up a little bit to preserve my guys and just get creative with how we want to attack teams defensively. I like this signing because it gives Houston another guy, coach on the field, very smart player, very tough player, very versatile player, very dependable player, and a guy that can allow them to get, again, I keep saying it, just the creativity that the thought of having him on that field will be able to bring.
I want to mention this really quick before moving on. Last year was a career year for Autry, 11.5 sacks, 4 pass breakups, and 2 forced fumbles. This how many came on the inside: 6.5 sacks, 2 pass breakups, and 1 forced fumble. Denico Autry is the versatility that Coach Denico Ryan's been hoping for since he took over as head coach.
Summertime means baseball and the NBA Finals and more. And guess what, guys? You can bet on it all at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets. They upped it a little bit for you guys instead of $150. $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything. To who do you believe will be the Finals MVP? Probably Jaylen Brown. Or who do you believe will be the one to knock it out the park for your team? Astros, any given night, who knows now? But you have $200 with any winning $5 bet that you'll be able to use to flip that money. So take advantage now. In order to do so, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and add a big win to your summer bucket list, right? Beer, summer bucket list, big wins, $200. You don't want to go missing on this deal. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. So we talk about the draft all the time. We talk about the players who were drafted. We've talked about Kamari Lassiter. We've talked about Cade Stover. We've talked about a few guys that were actually drafted. However, there's no way we can talk about the blueprint of this team, the DNA of this team, the makeup of the glory days of this team, and not mention Arian Foster, who just so happened to be an undrafted player. So, and I do think Houston has some good undrafted players. Let's look at the list before we dive into it. You have Phildarius Payne, the D lineman out of Virginia Tech. Max Tooley, I think maybe the better undrafted free agent for Houston. Out of BYU, linebacker Tariq Barnes, linebacker Illinois, British Brooks, running back North Carolina, and the twins, Jaden and Jackson Yankee, wide receivers out of South Dakota State. Cody, with your eyes, all 4 of them, can you bring it to the screen and discuss who's been the better undrafted rookie free agent so far?
Without a doubt, Max Tooley, man, plain and simple. And before I go into this, I do want to give somewhat of a disclaimer because, doing OTAs and mandatory minicamp, we did not have an opportunity to get a true sense of these undrafted rookie because times have changed. John, you remember over the last couple of years, we get on this show, and there were several undrafted free agents that we had an opportunity to highlight because they got more reps in practice. However, that was not the case during OTAs and mandatory minicamp, and it makes sense because now this team is more experienced and they're actually laying the groundwork towards something special. And of course, that special is hopefully a run at the AFC Championship game, hopefully being representing this conference in New Orleans next year. So, you can tell due to this team being different, being better, having more expectations, they kind of went away with giving so many of the young guys, giving so many of the undrafted free agents a lot of snaps out on the practice fields, as of now at least. However, when it comes to Max Tooley, man, that is the one undrafted free agent who always was in the mix of things. This young man, don't kill me, John. And you know how much I love Blake Cashman last year. But this young man literally reminded me of an undeveloped version of Blake Cashman. And I say that because the one thing that I love about Blake Cashman, that was arguably the Houston Texans' best linebacker in pass coverage. And that is what it's looking like Max Tooley is going to be as of right now. Look, majority of the time he did run with the third team, which means that he was going up against the likes of Case Keenum. Not CJ, not Davis Mills, Case Keenum. However, regardless of what you think about Case Keenum, that is still a veteran quarterback who the Houston Texans turned to when things got rough for them last season when CJ Stroud went down, which, by the way, I do believe at some point this week or maybe next week, we need to look at the quote-unquote, I don't want to call it a training camp battle, but I think we need to have a discussion on who's going to be second in command at the quarterback position in terms of if something happens to CJ, will they go to Davis Mills or Case Keenum? However, throughout this whole entire practice time, I had put him down for 3 pass breakups. His best came during an 11-on-11 play when he had an opportunity to break up a pass attempt between Case Keenum to British Brooks. And John, once again, the one thing that I love about Max Tooley, man, it seems like he's going to be that linebacker that's always going to make plays around the ball, just like Blake Cashman. Look, now I'm not about to sit here and say that he's going to take the snaps that Blake Cashman had. I mean, we can make the argument that he was the second best linebacker last year, looking at the development of Christian Harris, but Max Tooley definitely has something special about him. Another undrafted wide receiver that started catching my eye is Jaden Yankee. That young man had an opportunity to create plays on several occasions throughout OTAs and mandatory minicamp, and that's part of the reason why tomorrow I want to look at the depth of this wide receiving core and what that's going to mean for the Houston Texans moving forward.
What I like about Max Tooley is, and by no means do I think he's going to come in and take the jobs of not the starters, of course, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's
going to be on special teams, but his development, I could see it trending in that direction.
He's a guy that if all works out well, right, let's say everything goes great, then when you get towards the end of the deal with Al Sayed, then maybe – unless Houston, next year in the draft or however they may trade whoever, but maybe he's a guy that they trust to have more faith on that field, right? Like, okay, you know what? You're coming along. We're growing you. We're developing you. You're getting things how we want you to get them, and understand that this is Denico Ryan's. We saw a year's growth in Christian Harris in about 6 or 7 games last year. So maybe he can have that same impact on Tooley. But I think he's a guy that, because of how he plays, how he came out of college playing, Cody, you mentioned how well he's played during the mandatory OTAs and everything and rookie minicamp. I think he's a guy that Houston's going to really love for special team. Like, this is a team that values special teams. They've been one of the better special team units in the NFL over the last few years. Stephen Ross has done a very good job coaching this special team unit up. He's going to be a guy that I think we're going to see him make plays in preseason if he gets to that point, bearing our injury. But we're going to see him fly down. I got to listen, we may see him fly down with these new rules and smack somebody on special teams. And I'm looking forward to whether or not Houston decides to keep him. He'll always be practice squad eligible if he doesn't make the initial 53-man roster, which wouldn't be a shock, honestly. Realistically, that if he makes the PS, that may be better for Houston right now, but that also could be better for Houston later. Keeping him tucked away, allowing him to go through those practices and learning how they want to get things done defensively and just grow as a player. And again, best case scenario, a year or two down the line, he's a guy that's popping up more and more, making plays more and more. And now we're like, oh shoot. The other word. Max Tooley is recording tackles. He's making plays. He's out there being disruptive on special teams and on the defensive side of the ball as well.
And once really quick, speaking of undrafted free agent, I do want to mention this was kind of a shock, but then again, it kind of makes sense given the fact that they are giving Dameon Pierce an opportunity to prove that he can be the running back number 2. But I haven't seen a lot of Gerard Jordan so far throughout this whole entire offseason. Of course, we saw him at rookie minicamp, but it's rookie minicamp. You can't really tell too much then. And plus, that's only like a introductory to the league. But once the team got together and that running back group got together, I really didn't see a lot of Gerard Jordan. And I just wanted to point that out because it just shows, like I mentioned, that they're definitely giving and definitely keeping belief in Dameon Pierce, but at the same time, I do wonder what is going to be the end results for Gerard Jordan because he's still a talented young man, but maybe this can be a developmental year for him, where they just have him watch and learn from afar because you already know who your starter is going to be, and I've actually seen them utilize Dario Gumbawale a little bit more than I've seen from Gerard Jordan as well. Plus, you also got to keep in mind, how much of that goes into him, probably struggling with the playbook. We've heard Bobby Sawyer's playbook could be a little tricky, especially for younger guys. So, that's something I'm definitely going to keep my eyes out for in training camp.
And ain't nothing wrong with that.
No, it's definitely not.
If he's not an integral part of this offense, that means Dameon Pierce has done a damn good job of getting back to where he needed to be. That means Darray has done a very good job as a vet to being what he needs to be. By the way, shout out to Darray's sister.
MVP.
You want to talk about snubs for not making the U.S. team for the Olympic? It was Enrique. She is killing it for Dallas. I think she's averaging 27. So I know right now I know you made a field goal last year, brother, and when they needed you, but I'm killing you right now. But if Gerard Jordan doesn't see the field on the offensive side of the ball, that's not a bad thing for Houston. One thing that we've talked about all offseason is how Houston has an opportunity to become a player talent developed farm, right? You got guys that you may not see for the first year here in Houston. Blake Fisher is one of those guys as well. We may not see you play regular season football for the first year and a half of you being in Houston, but that's okay because during that time, you're on cheap deals, your contracts is close to nothing. We're developing you. So when we go on a second run, we ain't got to worry about filling a lot of holes. We got guys already ready to step up. So I wouldn't be shocked if Gerard Jordan don't get a lot of playing time this year. If he does, I have serious questions about what happened with the vets in front of him. But if he doesn't, then that means 2 out of 2 or one of those 2 guys are just killing it, and Gerard Jordan's tucked away and being preserved for the future. Welcome back, Locked On Texans listeners and viewers. Before we close out today's show, it's important that we discuss Steven Nelson, who Sunday, announced his retirement from the NFL. Of course, he was a Houston Texan for the past couple of seasons. When you look at Steven Nelson's best year in the NFL, maybe you can look at the 22 season, only allowed 366 yards. That was the best in his career. Only allowed 11.1 yards per catch. That was the second best in his career. Only allowed 91 yak yards. That was the best in his career. You look at Steven Nelson in his time in Houston, you can arguably say that during the totality of his time, he was the best cornerback for this team this past year. I think he had 4 or 5 interceptions. Steven Nelson, regardless of how you guys feel, regardless of how he may have felt over the course of the last couple of off seasons, whether it was the vest or the milk dud comment, he gave Houston some great moments at cornerback, I believe. And again, arguably the best during the course of the last 2 seasons. That has been Steven Nelson. He is retiring. I'm happy for him. The last time we saw him play football, he was damn good. So he's going out on his own terms. You got some corners in the league that continue to get jobs. No shot to them. But because of their names, I think this past year he's played better than both Patrick Peterson and Stephon Gilmore combined. And those guys are going to continue to get jobs until they retire or people see the light. Shout out to Steven Nelson. Hell of a career, hell of a Texan career. Helped the Houston Texans get to the playoffs for the first time since the letdown. And I think did a very good job of allowing and teaching Derek Stingley some things, as we are expecting for him to be the Texans' next great corner. I have no bad things to say about him. I'm not the other John. Maybe the other John may have some things to say, but I think he played phenomenal football for Houston.
Shout out to Steven Nelson, man. If you put together a list of the top 10, top 15 most impactful and best players for this organization over the last 2-3 seasons, Steven Nelson's name is definitely going to be on there. I mean, we know what he did on the field, but it was more so what I loved most was his teaching off the field. John, to your point, especially to someone like Derek Stingley Jr., cannot wait for training camp to start, because I know that's going to be one of the things that Stingley is going to talk about. And if you know Derek Stingley Jr., the one thing about him, he's very quiet until you ask him a question or ask him a topic that he wants to talk about. And I cannot wait to talk to him about Steven Nelson, because throughout his first 2 years, anytime, whether it was myself or other media members kind of asking, what are some of the things that you're learning from Steven Nelson, or, how it's been playing alongside Steven Nelson, that's one of the rare times that Derek Stingley Jr. will open up and give you something that you can actually work with. But once again, man, shout out to Steven Nelson. I saw a lot of people, talk about Steven Nelson only retired because he couldn't get a job. That's not true. He had offers from, I believe, about 6 to 7 teams. One of the teams, according to one person that I spoke to, was the Houston Texans. However, he just did not feel that the offer that they made was up to his par. And this is also a man who balled out and helped the Houston Texans get into the playoffs last season on an injured foot towards the back half of last season. Right. And of course, I think everybody's favorite moment when you talk about Steven Nelson is in the playoffs, when he recorded the first of 2 pick sixes on Joe Flacco, ran it to the house, man, had NRG Stadium just cutting up. Shout out to Steven Nelson, man. Awesome career. Hopefully he does good in the podcasting game, John. As you see, it seems like he's going to be focusing on that. But according to Aaron Wilson, Steven Nelson said matter of fact, the main reason why he wants to retire now is to focus on his family, and his wife is also expecting a child. So, kudos to fatherhood, kudos to a career, and I can't wait to see what's next for Steven Nelson.
Thank you guys for watching today's episode of the Locked On Texans podcast. Only allowed, it says 1 TD from PFL for Steven Nelson. Sometimes those numbers are tricky, but again, since arriving to Houston, he has not been known to give up a lot of touchdowns, man. 12 PBUs the last 2 years. Really kind of redeemed his career after Philly.
I think.
Yeah, after Philly, really redeemed his career. I mean, his last year, or his first and only year in Philly in 2021, nearly allowed, 70% of the catches. First year in Houston, they got bumped down to 60. Then after that, 59.4. Again, didn't allow a lot of yak yards here in Houston. Not penalized a lot. 4 penalties in Houston in the past 2 years. In Philly, 5. And those 2 years in the Pittsburgh Steelers, 9. Yeah, he came to Houston and really redeemed himself. So I ain't mad at it. I am not mad at Steven Nelson, man. But thank you guys for watching today's episode. Please subscribe on YouTube at Locked On Texans, and give me a follow on YouTube as well. I mean, on Twitter at John_Hickman12.
I'm about to say, you got another YouTube channel I don't know about. But as always, I'm your host, Cody M. Davis. Please remember to follow me on Twitter at Cody Davis _24. Once again, that's Cody COTYDAVIS _24. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, peace.